Okay, so we've been looking at our teams. And kind of what we saw was how our teams could alter some things, right? So we looked at this idea that in the short run, we have these short run costs and these long run costs. Right? And let's not forget that in the short run, things are basically fixed. In the long run, everything is variable. And in essence, what we said was that, well, in the short run, we could have things like our roster, concessions, etc. like that, right? So we could kind of think of basically as our short run cost is generally speaking basically one season, whereas our long run can be any time frame, right? So that, for example, if we're looking at, say, labor costs, these might be fixed for one season, and indeed they are. Whereas for something like our stadium, they could be fixed for, say, 30 years, right? So we can have these long time frames where things are fixed and variable. We also saw that to a large degree, these costs so that here's our cost here. And we said we were going to call this guy, say, our winning percent. And here was our dollars. Because when we looked at this from a productivity standpoint, we said here was, for example, our number of star players. Here's our winning percent. Right, we could see that we could kind of have something that kind of looks like this, right? So that as we increase the number of star players, we see our winning percentage increases. As our winning percentage increases, of course, costs are going up. Those players cost more and more. We also saw that this could lead to changes in our profits. So that if we were looking here at, say, our winning percent / attendance, right? Because those two things tend to be correlated. We could have revenue doing something like this. So in essence, here was our total revenue. And then if we included our costs over that, we could have some kind of, say, graph of our profits. So here's our winning percentage / attendance. Here's our A1, A2, and so we've got something that kind of looks like this. So here's our profit function, and then there's some level of optimal attendance. I'll call this guy, say, A star. That maximizes profits, right? And this can be different for different people. So for one team, this level of attendance here might be the profit of small team, right? Their optimal level of attendance AS star, right? For large team, it might be something completely different. Maybe it's over here, right? And since there is some correlation here between attendance and percentage, I mean, we could have winning percent there, or we could have attendance. I mean, you can change them around. They're somewhat interchangeable. So to get a sense of how our teams are doing here, we could look at this. So for example, we looked at stats from our teams last time. So this is from the Yankees and Boston, since they're perennial rivals. And we can kind of get a sense of how many games it takes to change spaces. So I can't remember which season this is from. This is from a couple of seasons ago. But you can see here in that particular season, Yankees had 103 wins, 59 losses. Boston had 95 wins, 67 losses, right? So let's increase losses for the Yankees and increase wins for Boston, right? So Yankees go down to 102 and 60, drops them to 0.63. Boston goes up 96 to 66. They go to 0.59. And then you can see here, 99, 63, 99, 63. Right? Here, in essence, is where they change. So all that the Yankees had to do was lose 1, 2, 3, 4 games. And all that all Boston had to do was win 4 games. And they could, in essence, switch places, right? You could, in essence, have Boston on top of the Yankees. You can see this when we're talking about these winning percentages. I mean, you can see that in terms of our teams here. So that, for example, on average, when we looked at those stats and we showed, oh, look, this team's at here, this team's there, you know, on average, these bottom-ranked teams if you do this over multiple seasons, right, they've got a winning percent of 0.377. Like I said, I'm doing this for baseball. And they would need 0.078 increase to move to 4th place, right? You average this out for a whole bunch of teams, all of these. No, this is for one particular season. This averages out to an average increase of 0.039. In that particular season, they were 0.408, right? So you have a pretty small margin of error to move from being last to 4th place. And it's the same for all of these. So all we have to do is win, in this example, 4 games. And we're in the 1st place, not in 2nd. Right? In this particular year, Yankees were 1st, Boston was 2nd. All right? Out of 162 games. It's not that hard. Right? It can be done. So, how can our teams alter these guys, right? Our costs and our revenues. Because we can manipulate these profits if we want to, right? So if we're looking here at our profits for our teams, This is from several years ago, but essentially it's the same thing. If we're looking at the operating income for our teams, right, we can see that we can have some wide variety here. So we can have, for example, in this year, and these are all in $1996. I can't remember what year this is actually from. They've changed it into $96. It's not from 1996 though. For example, in that year, the Yankees had $38 million in operating income, right? Braves lost $400,000. New York Knicks made $22 million. The Denver Nuggets lost $1.4 million. Kansas City Chiefs made $10.9. Buffalo Bills lost $2.5 million, etc. Right? Because if we want to alter these things, if we want to alter our profit, right, we can change this guy or we can change this guy, right? And there's lots of different ways to do this. So, for example, our Dodgers this is from 2005. So let's look at, say, our LA Dodgers. So here in this year, they had gate receipts of $71 million. They had other revenues of $118 million. They had total here $189 million, right, in revenue. They had player expenses $111 million. They had other expenses, so these could be things like front office, etc. $65 million, so that they have operating income quote unquote profit here, about $13.4 million, right, within this year. That was 2005, right? So in this particular year, in this 2005 season, they drew 3.6 million fans, right, which was an increase from 3.1 million about, several years earlier, say in the early 90s, just using 1996 as a general rule. They had 3.1 million in 1996. They're in the second largest market. They have 300 acres of downtown real estate. But they only had a profit of $13 million. You have $65 million in other expenses, right? I mean, there's all kinds of ways to manipulate these figures, to make them be all kinds of things that you want them to be. And one of the things that we can do is that you can set up the team in such a way that you're actually saving yourselves tons of money in taxes. Here we see the team owner paid himself a huge administrative salary, right? The front office does not take $65 million in expenses. A lot of this is salary, revenue, dividends, whatever you want to call it, income to the team owner. And it's to avoid double taxation, right? So we have ways in here of having the owner pay himself to avoid double taxation, right? Now, when we talk about double taxation in economics and we're talking about corporations, how does that work exactly? Do you guys remember? Yeah. So you've got a company here. You've got a corporation. Let's assume it has one owner. The corporation has revenues of 1,000. It can be 1,000 anything. They have costs of 500. Right? So the corporation's profit, $500, millions, whatever it is that you want it to be. It can be any number that you want it to be. Let's assume we have a tax rate of 20%. Okay? So now we're going to play taxes here of 100. So we have our net profit here, 400. This gets distributed to the owners of the firm in the form of dividends. Right, so now the corporation's out. But here, this 400 for the owners over here, for the shareholders, they've got this net dividend of 400, right? And they're going to have to pay taxes, and the number can be anything that we want it to be. We'll make the income tax rate 10%. It can be anything we want it to be. So now they'll pay income taxes on their own personal taxes of 40, leaving 360, right? This is what we mean by double taxation. The corporation's profits are taxed at the corporate rate and at the personal rate. But if we set this up as an S corp, right, those incomes can pass through the company straight onto our income tax form and be taxed only once. Or if we set it up as a C corp, we can change things, we can basically alter and move things around depending upon how we pay ourselves, so that we're essentially avoiding a lot of this double taxation. Other things that we can do is we can note that interest on debt is subtracted from our revenue. Right? So it makes our net income smaller. So what does that mean for our companies? What do they try to do with that? Yeah, take on a lot of debt, because the cost of the debt has now decreased by, in essence, the tax rate. It's the same thing on your interest for your mortgage, right? So if you have a mortgage and they allow you to deduct your mortgage interest, which in essence the government still does do today, they may or may change that in the future, we'll see. So here you are at, say, and I'm making up a number here, you've got $10,000 in interest on your mortgage. Right? And let's assume your mortgage interest rate is 5%. I'm making up a number. So here's your interest rate. And let's assume you're in a 20% tax bracket. So here's your income. It can be anything that you want it to be, $100,000. You're going to have this 20% tax bracket, right? So you're going to pay $20,000 in taxes. It's going to leave you with $80,000. If you can deduct your interest, now this $100,000 in income doesn't become $100,000. Now he's $90,000. 20% on this, 10% is $9,000, $18,000. Here's your $70,000. Here's what you have after paying your taxes and the interest on your mortgage. You have $70,000 left over. 90 minus 18. Well, we've already taken off the mortgage. Now we're at 90 minus 18. I can't. I've been making math mistakes all day long today, so might as well go ahead and do this. 72. $100,000 in income, $20,000 in taxes, $80,000 after taxes. I paid $10,000 in interest on my mortgage. I got $70,000 after taxes, after mortgage. $100,000 in income. I got to take off the $10,000 in interest I paid on my mortgage. Got $90,000 in income after mortgage. Going to pay 20% tax on that, $18,000 in taxes. Now my tax bill is $72,000. I just made $2,000. $1 not paid in taxes is $1 paid to you in income, right? You're up $2,000. Another alternative way to think of this is that the interest isn't really $10,000. You're really only paying $8,000 in mortgage interest, right? Or your interest rate isn't really 5%. Your interest rate is really 4%. It's the same thing over here, all right? Interest on debt is subtracted from revenue. We don't have to pay taxes on that. It's essentially tax-free, right? So we can alter how we structure payments, how we structure these costs. Do we want to pay interest or do we not want to pay interest, right? Well, yes, paying $10,000 is worse than paying nothing, but $8,000 is better than paying $10,000. So if you're going to have to borrow, if you're going to have to pay for it, maybe it makes sense to borrow the money. The owners can also depreciate assets. What's their biggest asset? And it's not the stadium. The players.
How are they valued? How are they valued then?
Valued at what they're paying them at. And they depreciate them. There was a syndicate. Syndicate's just a group of investors. Bought the Milwaukee Braves, brought them to Atlanta. This happened in 1964. They spent $6.168 million for the team. They declared the value of the players at $6.118 million. These players were depreciated over 10 years. And they used a straight line depreciation, so they're reducing their net income by $611,800 per year. This is a straight line. Depreciation. In 1964, the top tax rate was 77%. They're saying, hey, our income has fallen by $611,800 per year, right? I mean, just like anything else that you would do with anything else. Here's your income. Strike that. Here's your revenue. Revenue is 100. You have costs of, say, 30. You have depreciation. I'm just making up a number here of, say, 20. What's left over here? 50, right? If you don't have the depreciation, your income is going to be 70, right? So in essence, they're taking $611,800 off of net profit, making it $611,800 smaller every single year at a tax rate of 77%, which means that they are in essence earning $470,000 reduction per year in taxes. And remember, a dollar's reduction in taxes is a dollar increase in income. So they just made themselves $470,000 richer, right? Over 10 years' time, here's $4.7 million. The team only costs $6.168 million. In essence, what they did is 3/4 of the cost of the team was paid by who? I'm going to buy the team for $61.68 million. I'm going to depreciate the assets, the players, at $611,800 per year at a top tax rate of 77%. That means I get $470,000 back every single year on my taxes. So I didn't really pay $6.168 for the team, $6.168 million for the team. I paid $6.168 minus $4.70. How much did the team really cost me? Team really cost me $1.468 million. Who paid the other part? Nope. Nope. Taxpayers. The taxpayers bought my team. Because I got $4.7 million back from this. And here's what's really, really interesting. Any accounting majors in here? If I'm depreciating this as an asset, which side of the ledger is it on?
So the debit just declining.
And my costs here are also my player salaries. So I'm subtracting my player salaries, and at the exact same time, I'm depreciating the value of the asset.
You're doing it, yeah, like it's a cost it twice.
Exactly. If Missouri State does that for their, if I've got a company and I do that for my cars, and I go to the IRS, what are they going to say? Am I going to be in trouble? Yeah, I'm going to be in trouble. Do you guys understand the problem if you're not an accounting major? If you've never had a class in accounting?
What lets them value the player with that?
Because it's sports. Here's my revenues. I made 100. I go out and I buy a car. I've got 80 left over, right? Right? That's my taxable income. What in essence they are doing now is they're saying, oh, no, no, no. It's not just this. I also have to subtract off the depreciation of the car. It's actually this. You can't expense it on the expense side and depreciate it on the asset side. You can do one or the other, but you can't do it both. You can't say, I spent 20 on the car, oh, and I'm going to depreciate the value of the car at 20. You already got the car. It's here. You've counted it twice.
So are they essentially saying that the player's salary and it being an asset are just two separate things?
They're saying that, exactly. And they still do that today. They are allowed to depreciate the player salaries and depreciate the players, to make their income here not be 80, but 60. If IBM tried this, they would be in trouble. If any other business in the world tried to do this, they would be in trouble. You can't do that. It's not proper accounting. You can't have something both on the asset side and on the expense side. It doesn't work that way. It's on one side or the other. It can't be on both sides.
Has this always been the system?
Yeah. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. At the end of 10 years, you've got an asset. If you're doing straight line depreciation, there's lots of different ways to do depreciation. You buy a car for $20,000, and you engage in a 10-year plan of straight line depreciation. That means every year you're taking off $2,000. All the way down here to 10. Okay, and then you're done.
Do they use like double declining balance?
It's just straight line. What do you think they did at the end of 10 years? Because you can't depreciate the players anymore. They're all depreciated out to zero. Do you guys understand what I mean by depreciation? When you buy a car, and I'm going to use the car as an example because that's something everybody's familiar with, right? When you buy a car for $20,000, that car can only travel so long, right, before it has zero value, right? Every single time you drive that car, it's worth a little bit less. So if your car is going to get, say, 200,000 miles, and at the end of 200,000 miles it's done, when you've driven this car 100,000 miles, you've used up 50% of the car, right? It's depreciated. It's lost its value. There's only 50% left. And let's assume that its salvage value is 0. You can't get anything for it. All right? Every single time you drive that car, you're using it up. It's a capital asset, and that capital asset is giving you services. And the value of those services is declining over time. You're using it up. As you're driving the car, you're using up those services.
So for the players, do they like redo their contracts to make them assets again?
Nope. So when we're all done, the value of the car is 0. Here's our company. We bought these players. The players are done. Here's what we're going to do. I, as the team owner, am going to create a whole new separate company that I also own. And I, owner A, of company A, I'm going to sell the team to owner A, company B, and restart the process all over again. Because it's a completely separate company. I just happen to own both of these companies. I own company A and I own company B. Company A has already depreciated the value of the players all the way down to 0. Company B over here hasn't. Company B is starting all over. Depreciation starts all over again. Of course, I'm the same owner. It's the same players, but I'm still depreciating them out all the way to 0. Right? So we can see all kinds of different ways to do this, right? And like I said, we can organize these companies as, say, S-corps. And if we organize them as an S-corp, it's essentially a pass-through where the team's revenues pass through right onto my personal return. So in our S-corp, profits are taxed on our personal income. And not the corporate tax rate. So for us currently, the income tax rate is higher than the corporate tax rate. But we can manipulate things around, right? So let's assume we have an operating profit of $200,000. And we have depreciation of 470. We now have a book loss of $270,000. All right, well, at 77%, that's a reduction in taxes of $207,900. If this was a corporate rate at this time, the corporate rate at this time was 52%. That would have been a loss of only $140,400. Reduction in taxes, right? Because in the 1960s, when all this was done, the income tax rate, the personal income tax rate, was higher than the corporate tax rate. Well, you don't want to pay it on the corporate if you have a loss. You want that loss to pass through and come through on my personal. Because on my personal, it's worth $207,000. If it's done it corporately, it's only worth $140,000. And so we want all of those dollars passing right through the team, right onto my personal income taxes. Right? And it's still the case that the income tax rate for personal is higher than it is for corporate, which is why all these are set up as S corps. We want all of those funds passing through the team onto our personal taxes. So the value of these depreciations hits us right here. I mean, that's a credit. So that next year when we make money, if we have $200,000 that we have to pay in taxes, we don't have to pay it. Because we have a credit of $207,900 with the IRS. This is what Trump was accused of doing, right? Booking a huge loss in 1 year that was so large that made his income burden so small, negative a gazillion dollars, that it took like 12, 15 years of profits and taxes on that to get to the point where we had to pay taxes again. It's the exact same thing here. Okay, we'll pick it up from here on Monday.